Okay, moving on now. I have my middle section of my bodice, which is the stiffer fabric I told you about earlier. It goes between the lining and the outer fabric. And what I tend to do, this is one method of doing it, to create some boning channels, is to use the seams. And first of all, start off by pinning. As you can see, the seam flap's been pinned that way, and it's been pinned just temporarily in place right through all the layers of fabric. And you always make sure that your seam flaps are going the opposite ways. Like, for example, to the left here, this flap is going that direction, and the side seam is going towards that direction. When you get to the back, you have to make sure that your flaps on this side is pointing towards that direction. And similar for the other side, make sure this flap's facing that way, this one that way, and this flap that way. Okay. Next stage, as you can see I've done here, is just to sew your seams down onto the machine. Like so. So now you will have your channels now if you've fed your boning through later on. Just for a second, quickly moving on to the lining. We've just ironed the seams flat on these, and if you remember what I was just explaining before for the stiffer fabric, which way to pin your seams, basically you do the same here, except you just iron them. You don't need to pin or sew because you're not doing boning channels, you just iron them the same way as before, like so. Next, I'm pinning my inner fabric to my lining, starting from the centre front seam. So making sure your good side of your lining is facing downwards and your seam flaps towards the inside, and make sure this fabric has your seams, as you can see, facing down as well. And I'm just pinning from the centre the two layers together along the edge, all the way along to the back, like so. And then I'm doing the same for the other side as well. Okay, next I've decided to add something extra to my costume. I've got this lace that I used on my petticoat, which is about 7 centimetres wide, or about 3 inches. I've already started to pin it in place onto my bodice. Like so. And at first I was just going to have all the lace finish at the same height all the way around, but we came up with another idea. It made it look a bit nicer, is to sort of have it sort of coming out gradually at the very start, so it sort of fans out, gets wider towards the top. So at the moment that's just been pinned in place like that, all the way around, and the same for the other side as well, all the way to the back. I'm now just going to go and tack it in place so that I can take all the pins out. Next I'm going to take my other two pieces, the lining and the inner fabric that I tacked together just a minute ago, and I've now got to pin them to my outer bodice, which is the side I want to see. Again, starting at the centre, make sure your lining is towards the inside, that the good side of your bodice is showing towards you, like so. Just start pinning edge to edge all the way around. Of course, to make note as you pin, make sure everything is flat as you go. Don't want any kinks as we go along. If you decide not to put a collar in, like me, you just skip the collar and then you just run straight to this section on the video, if you wish. I've now tacked all my layers together in the red thread, as you can see by my finger there, or thumb I should say. So all levels have been tacked across the top. I've also pinned down the sides, because now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew, starting from the centre, about the usual 1 centimetre seam all the way across. When I reach the back here, I've got to stop where I put my pin. I've got to turn it around in the machine, and then I'm going to start sewing 1 centimetre in from this edge, the back edge, and sew all the way down where I've put my pins. And then I'm going to repeat this for the other side. So start from the centre, sew out, get to the edge, then sew all the way down, and just sew all the layers together. The next thing to do, which is very important, is to get your scissors and clip every few centimetres or so into the corners, and as I said before, not through the sewing line, or you will not be happy. And just do that all the way along, and that helps with turning it inside out later on, and it just helps the fabric. As you can see here, I try and bend it the right way. It just helps the fabric at your seams just bend more easily when you come to give it a press later on. So remember to cut at the corners as well, again without going through your sewing line. Just sort of cut from here down to the edge there, and do that both sides. And again, it just helps when you turn it inside out and you'll have a sharper corner. After a quick fitting, putting everything on, like the hoop, skirt and everything that you're going to wear, Mum has pinned all 3 layers together while it was on me to hold them in place. And the next thing we're going to do is to neaten the armhole.
Right, we're now neatening the inside of the sleeve, and what I need to do is make sure that the liner is flat, and then I want to do a neaten seam around the armhole, tucking away all those cut edges out of the way, and then just turn the lining, and I'd like it to meet up with the stitching that's sewed the sleeve in, like so. And when you've done all the way around, then it can be hand sewn. The lining can be hand sewn onto the inside of the sleeve. Now that it's pinned into place, we're now just going to catch stitch the lining to the edge of the sleeve where it was sewn in. And you do that all the way around. Right, now we're ready to measure up for our boning strips. And this is going to be my sewing line for the edge of the bodice, because we're going to put some piping on. Go to measure from the top to where the pins are, which is 36 centimetres. Then I'm going to take off 3 centimetres. That's to allow for the end caps that have to go on. So my final measurement for the middle one will be 33 centimetres. And then you do the same with all your other seams. Measure down to your pinned mark and then reduce that measurement by 3 centimetres. So these are my boning strips. There's going to be 7 altogether, but the middle one is going to be a solid metal boning. That will just go into the middle strip, but the other piece of boning will be sprung, which looks like this, which allows for a little bit of movement going sideways.
For my back opening, I'm going to be using hooks and eyes. I bought the hooks so that they are on the edge of the tape. You can buy a different type of hook and eye tape where the hooks and eyes are in the centre and the tape's a little bit wider. But for what I wanted them on the edge. I bought this tape in white and it was cotton, so I was able to dye it a blue to match my top. And at the moment we're just pinning it on in place to do a test run. Between the hooks and eyes on the back of the bodice, I'm going to create this fill-in section in case you get the odd gap or two down the back, and then all you will see then is a strip of blue showing through. I've cut out this piece, which is about 45 centimetres long and about 9 to 10 centimetres wide, and because of the angle at the bottom of the bodice, we've had to cut this in the opposite way because of how it's going to end up, like so. Fold your strip of fabric in half with good sides to good side if you have an outer and inner side in your fabric. If not, you don't need to worry, just turn it halfway whichever way, and then we're just pinning across the top and across the bottom.
Then we're going to sew down into that angle and then up,
and then sew across the top. Just bulk around the bottom of the trim. Next up, just give your piece a good iron, so you've got a nice crisp seam there, and iron flat across the bottom. Next thing to do is you have two options here. The edge needs sewing together, so you can either overlock it if you have an overlocker machine like we do, or you can zigzag down the edge all the way to the bottom. The next thing to do is to get your hook and eye tape. I've got the left side of my bodice here, and I've just turned over the top of the tape by about 1 centimetre, so we've got a nice neat edge there at the top, and that edge meets the top of the bodice more or less. You can see the direction of the hooks, and we've just literally at this stage just pinned that down in place so it meets the edge, like so. Now onto the right side here of the bodice. I've done the same again, turn the top edge over, make sure the eyes are pointing out this way, and I've just pinned it all the way to the bottom, like so. Also make sure that you turn under the bottom of the tape as well for a nice neat edge. And the other thing to do is to make sure before you sew it down that your hooks and eyes are in line and that they meet up. It'll be nothing worse than if you've just sewn it all on and you come to do it up and they're all out of line. So Good tip for you there, folks. Right. Next thing to do is to attach your filling strip to the right hand edge of the bodice. As you can see, what I've done here, I've just lined, so you've got the overlocking line here, I've lined that up so that it's in line with the edge of the tape. So this is your tape here. Make sure this is lined up with that edge I'm trying to point to. So I've just tacked it in place here because I'll be sewing right down here along the inside of that overlocked edge as my guide all the way to the bottom. And then when I turn it over, it should look like that. Okay, I've now sewn down the strip like so. So on the outside it will look like that. Then moving on to the other side where we had the flap, turn it over, it should look like so. So here we go, this is when the hooks and eyes are closed. Because it's got to be quite tight at the back and there's going to be a lot of pull on it. If there's a bit too much pull, you should just then see the strip of fabric come between. So it just makes it look a little bit nicer. Right, on to the next part.
This is the inside now, showing the hook side, and we don't want it gaping open like this when it's on. So what I'm doing at the moment is just putting a couple of catch stitches between the hooks and eyes. They don't have to be too tight, so just a couple of little stitches to pull the hook tape to the bodice, and then a neat little trick, go down into the seam allowance, hide that stitch away, and then come up halfway between the next hook and eye, and then put another couple of catching stitches and go back into the seam allowance with your needle and come up halfway between the next two, and so on all the way down. And this is what it looks like when you've finished doing that. Okay, now we're going to do the boning channels. All of my boning pieces are being cut to size and they've all got end caps on. And when you're feeding the boning into the channel that you've made, push it up as far as it will go, because you don't want it too low down for when you're doing a row of stitching across the bottom. My boning is about here at the moment. Pushed it up as far as it will go, and then once we've sewn our bodice line across there, then we'll just push the boning down a bit so it doesn't poke out through the material. Now that we've got the boning in, we're now going to measure for our piping. So where you've drawn your line for the bottom of your bodice, measure all the way across and then just add a few centimetres to allow for a bit of allowance. Using that measurement, you're now going to take a piece of material and cut on the diagonal just about the measurement that you have got. And when you're cutting this, make it approximately 4 to 5 centimetres wide. You can always cut off any excess afterwards. double the material over and sandwich your piping in between, and put your pins up as high as you can to keep your piping right up against the top. And the next step will be to run a tacking stitch just below where your piping is going to be.
Okay, on to the next part. We next ran a line of stitching to line up our piping along the bodice, where you can see where my finger is, all the way across and then right to the other side. We're then going to take a strip of piping and line it up, this line of stitching with the line of stitching on the bodice, and at the moment we're just pinning it in place. You might find when you get to the centre front point of pinning your piping that you have trouble trying to manipulate the piping round the corner. As you see, it's all bunching up and horrible. What you have to do is just simply get a pair of scissors and cut, but not through your piping. There we go, now you're able to manipulate the piping around that sharp point a lot easier of any bulk at the point.
Having sewn on the piping, the next step will be to neaten the edge. So I've overlocked this, or you could just use a zigzag stitch to neaten it off, and then you'll be turning underneath and pinning that in place.
Once you've turned your piping inwards, next thing to do is to catch stitch the edge all the way to your lining where my thumb is pointing without going through to the outside fabric. You could, if you wanted to, sew it all down with machine, but then you will have an ugly sewing line all the way along and it just doesn't look tidy. So to start with, I just do a few good stitches to fasten it down and sew it to the lining there, so it should hold, because it needs to be so tight, it should hold in place. Every so often when I'm catch stitching, I go over some places twice just for a bit of extra strength. For extra info on doing this, please see my Disney Belle bodice tutorial video. On this video, about 19 minutes in, I roughly show you there how to catch stitch it onto the bodice, so just to save me explaining it all over again, please refer to that video. So it should look like this once it's been finished. It gives it a nice, beautiful, neat edge. I'll just show you a quick whiz round how far I've got so far. I've put it on the skirt at the moment. Give it a quick tour around the side. Back here, like so, and then that'll meet up to that. Now it's a little hard on Betty to get them to meet up. Betty is the name of the dummy, by the way. It doesn't fit her quite like it fits me. But there we go.